My wife took my business credit card without asking and used it to host a grand party at a luxury restaurant. Later, she called me and said, I paid the $42,000 party bill with your credit card. I couldn't stop laughing until her face turned pale when she realized she was in trouble. The phone rang sharply, cutting through the stillness of the afternoon. I glanced at the caller ID. It was my wife, Jessica. Mark, she said in a casual tone, as if this were just a normal conversation. You need to come to ISA restaurant right away. You know, the one across from the station. The whole family's here waiting for you. I was confused. ISA restaurant? You mean that fancy French place? What do you mean the whole family is waiting for me? Without waiting for me to understand what was going on, Jessica interrupted. Yeah, I reserved the entire place. I even invited some of the family members who usually can't make it. It's going to be great. There was a pause. Then she added, the cost is around $20,000, and I'll be paying with your credit card. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stood there in silence, gripping the phone. Did she just say my credit card? $20,000? Was this a joke? But deep down I knew it wasn't. Jessica had pulled reckless stunts before, but this was different. Despite the shock, I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. I wasn't about to let her get away with this, whatever this was. 20 minutes later, I arrived at ISA restaurant, my mind racing with questions. How could Jessica be so careless? What was her plan? Did she really think I'd let her spend $20,000 without a second thought? As I walked into the restaurant, I spotted Jessica standing by the entrance. She was alone with that smug, unsettling smile on her face, like she had everything under control. But I could see the cracks in her composure. Mark, she said, spreading her arms wide as if greeting an old friend. The relatives are in the other room. We're just getting started. I stared at her, still trying to process everything. Jessica, you can't seriously be planning to pay $20,000 with my credit card. Her grin widened. Of course I am. Like I said, it's only natural for a husband to support his wife. Don't you agree? I couldn't believe my ears. Was this the woman I had married? The woman standing before me seemed more like a stranger. Someone so consumed by arrogance that she couldn't see the mess she was creating for herself. Jessica, I said, trying to remain calm, this is ridiculous. You don't even have a plan, do you? You don't understand what you're doing. But Jessica wasn't listening. She looked at me like I was the one who didn't understand. Mark, don't worry about the details. I've got everything covered. She leaned in closer and lowered her voice. A husband's money belongs to his wife. Remember? My patience snapped. You really don't get it, do you? This isn't about money. It's about respect. And you're crossing a line, Jessica. Jessica shrugged, unfazed by my words. You can argue all you want, but in the end I'm paying with your card. If you have a problem with that, maybe you should stop being my husband. There it was. The threat. It wasn't the first time she had used divorce as leverage to control me, but today I wasn't going to back down. I pulled out a folded piece of paper from my pocket and held it in front of her. What's this? Jessica asked, her eyes narrowing. I canceled the credit card a month ago, I said, my voice steady. Here's the cancellation certificate. For the first time, Jessica looked unsure of herself. She grabbed the paper from my hand and scanned it quickly, her face turning pale. No way, she muttered under her breath. You are lying. This has to be fake. Why would I lie? I shot back. I knew you'd try something like this, so I prepared for it. That card is useless now, Jessica. So tell me, how are you going to pay for this dinner without any money? Jessica clenched her jaw, her eyes darting around the restaurant as if searching for a way out. I took the card from your wallet this morning, she said through gritted teeth. If it was really canceled, why would you still carry it around? I let out a short, bitter laugh. I left it there on purpose, Jessica. I knew you'd try to steal it. And guess what? You fell for it. Her expression darkened. For a moment she stood there in stunned silence. But then her anger flared up. Mark, you're really starting to test my patience, she hissed, her voice rising. A wife doesn't talk to her husband like this. Her voice was so loud that heads turned in our direction. The other diners began to whisper, casting curious glances our way. I could feel the tension building around us, but Jessica didn't seem to care. Her ego was too fragile, her pride too easily wounded. I stood there, watching Jessica's face twist in a mix of shock and anger as my words seemed to slip right through her fingers. She tried to argue, but her eyes betrayed her, revealing the desperation hiding behind that arrogant exterior. Deep down, I knew she was cornered with no way out. Her look of superiority had vanished, leaving only that uncomfortable silence between us. "You think you can make a fool out of me?" she muttered, somewhere between a whisper and a shout. What kind of husband humiliates his own wife like this, in front of everyone? Her words hit me, but not in the way she intended. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, then stared at her, letting her see the disappointment I felt. For a moment, I thought of responding gently, but I realized that was probably the problem all along. I had always tried to be understanding, while she kept crossing boundaries that anyone else would see as unacceptable. What kind of wife steals from her husband and has the nerve to call him here to watch the show? I replied, no longer caring about the curious eyes around us. Because that's what you wanted, isn't it? A spectacle to show everyone you have control, even over my own money. Jessica took a step back, as if my words had physically struck her. For the first time, I felt like I had an edge in this insane game she insisted on playing. It was at that moment I realized how much my patience had cost me over the years. She was so used to stepping all over me that now, faced with even a bit of resistance, she was falling apart. "This is humiliation," she hissed, but her eyes said something deeper, darker. "No, Jessica. Humiliation is what you put me through tonight. I'm done letting you treat my life as if it's just an extension of your whims," I responded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders with every word. She looked around, noticing that people were indeed watching us, and her face flushed. The anger was now mixed with embarrassment, and for a brief second, I saw a hint of vulnerability Jessica rarely showed. But soon enough, she put her smug expression back on, as if flipping a switch. "You'll regret this, Mark. You can bet on it," she said, her tone cold and almost threatening. I knew that sentence wasn't just a bluff. Jessica was the type who couldn't accept defeat, and any attempt to confront her was seen as an unforgivable offense. But in that moment, I didn't care anymore. Something inside me had changed. The public humiliation, the veiled betrayal, the complete lack of respect. It all felt like a full stop that I was finally ready to write. She turned and stormed out without looking back. I stood there alone, feeling the curious gazes of the other diners, wondering what they thought of us. That night had been a turning point. For the first time, I didn't feel afraid of the consequences. Instead, I felt almost relieved to have finally drawn a line. When I got home, the silence was almost tangible. Jessica wasn't there, probably spending the night at some luxury hotel, and I knew that the next day, she would return with a fresh list of demands and justifications, trying to make me feel guilty. But this time, I was determined not to give in. Hours later, exhausted from all the thinking, I heard the door unlock. She entered slowly, with a neutral expression, but her eyes were filled with controlled anger. "Can we talk?" she asked, without the usual sweetness she used when trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. I nodded, trying to keep my composure. She sat on the couch, crossed her legs, and looked at me, as if calculating every word she was about to say. "What happened today was shameful, Mark. I really thought you understood our arrangement." "What arrangement?" I interrupted, confused. "The one where you make absurd decisions and spend my money without asking me." She sighed, irritated. "It's more than that, Mark. You knew from the beginning that I had ambitions, that I wanted a luxurious life. And you always agreed. I never forced you into anything. I agreed to support you, Jessica, but not to be humiliated, betrayed, and manipulated. There's a big difference between helping and being made a fool." She looked at me with cold eyes, and for the first time, I realized that there might be nothing there but self-interest. Love, if it ever existed, had been lost somewhere along the way. "If you can't support me, then maybe I should find someone who understands my needs." She said it so coldly that it felt like a final threat. She wanted me to back down, to beg her to stay, but instead, I felt only a strange sense of freedom. I finally understood that no matter how hard I tried, Jessica would always put her own desires above everything else. Maybe that would be best for both of us then, I replied firmly, because I can't live like this anymore. Jessica looked at me in disbelief, as if I had just challenged her to a mortal duel. She wasn't used to hearing a no from me, and my response clearly threw her off balance. But instead of backing down, she held her rigid posture and raised one eyebrow, sarcastic. "Are you sure that's what you want?" she asked, her voice almost sweet, as if she was still trying to twist the situation in her favor. "Absolutely." She stood up slowly, smoothing her dress with her usual elegance, but her eyes had a menacing gleam. "Then I hope you're ready to deal with the consequences." She left the house without looking back, but I knew this wasn't over. Jessica was capable of anything to get what she wanted, and I wouldn't be surprised if she tried to turn my life into a nightmare just to prove I was wrong. I knew what she was capable of, but I wasn't afraid anymore. The days that followed that night at the restaurant were a test of endurance and patience. Jessica continued living with me, but it was as if we were on opposite sides of a silent war. She'd throw me looks of disdain and, on some nights, would attempt to act as if nothing had happened, slipping into the bedroom with subtle, manipulative attempts at reconciliation. But for me, none of that worked anymore. I had decided not to back down this time. This time, it would be different. This time, she would face the consequences. As the weeks passed, I discreetly sought out a lawyer, someone who could guide me through a potential divorce without alerting Jessica to my intentions. I explained the situation and everything I had endured over the years. I told him about Jessica's behavior, her manipulations, her threats to leave me if I didn't yield to her whims. To my surprise, the lawyer listened with interest, and when I was done, he gave a small, knowing smile. "If you follow the plan I have in mind, not only will you leave this marriage unscathed, but you'll also have a chance to turn the tables," he assured me. I paid attention to every detail. The plan involved strategic transfers of company assets, careful reorganization of finances, and gathering proof of Jessica's behavior. Luckily, many of our assets and investments were already in my name alone, so the process wouldn't be as complicated as I'd thought. Under the lawyer's guidance, I reorganized our finances to make sure that all the debts and extravagant expenses Jessica had accumulated were tied to her and not to me. I knew that, in the end, her own actions would be her downfall. All I had to do was wait for the right moment. Meanwhile, I kept up a normal routine, pretending I was trying to move past the restaurant incident. Jessica, maybe thinking I had finally accepted the lifestyle she forced upon me, resumed spending money as if she had an endless supply. Luxury purchases, expensive jewelry, reservations at high-end hotels. It all continued, except now she was using her own resources. Of course, most of those resources were what I had left strategically for her to use, just enough to let her trap herself in the web she was spinning. Finally, the day arrived to make my move. After months of preparation, I filed for divorce. I already had all the evidence and witnesses I needed to prove that Jessica had manipulated and financially abused our marriage. My lawyer had done an impeccable job, and the filing was done quietly, so she wouldn't know until it was too late to react. When Jessica received the court notice, I stood silently in the corner of the room, watching as she read the document, her face shifting between disbelief and fury. "What is this?" she shouted, throwing the papers on the table. "Do you think you can get rid of me like this?" "This is the result of years of manipulation, Jessica. Years of threats, of humiliation," I replied, keeping my calm. "This divorce should have happened a long time ago. But now, I'm prepared. And this time, you're not going to take anything that doesn't belong to you." She started laughing, but it was hollow, forced. "You think you can do this? I'll get half of everything. The house, the business, whatever you think you're keeping. If you think you'll get out of this without giving me what's mine, you're dead wrong." Little did she know that over the past few months, I had successfully transferred the business to an investment fund, safeguarding it from any claims she might make. Moreover, every luxurious expense she had made over the years was meticulously documented. With the lawyer's help, I had gathered a mountain of evidence showing that not only did she spend money recklessly, but also that these expenses were entirely her responsibility. Those $42,000 from the party, for example, were neatly attached as proof of financial abuse. "You'll get exactly what you contributed to this marriage, Jessica," I said, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Which, as far as I can tell, is almost nothing. She tried to argue, but my lawyer had prepared an unassailable case. In court, the judge listened patiently to her arguments, but one by one, all the evidence I presented was laid out. Photos, receipts, text messages showing her threats regarding divorce. Everything was carefully documented and displayed. By the end, she looked like a stranger to everyone in that room, a selfish and manipulative person who only cared about her own pleasure, while destroying the life of everyone around her. The judge didn't hesitate. The ruling was clear. The divorce would be granted, and Jessica would not be entitled to any of the assets. But the final blow came with the decision that, for me, was the cherry on top. The $42,000 debt from the restaurant would be entirely hers. I watched as she absorbed this last part of the ruling, her face tightening in pure fury and humiliation. As we left the courtroom, she turned to me, her eyes full of hatred. "You're not going to get away that easily, Mark. I'll ruin you. I'll make your life a living hell." I just smiled, feeling a strange sense of serenity wash over me. "I think you've done that long enough, Jessica. Now it's your turn to face the consequences." She tried to throw the words back at me, but she seemed to have lost her fire, as if she'd finally realized that, this time, I wasn't the passive man she could control. She had lost, and for the first time, I was free. In the months that followed, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Jessica had to sell her jewelry and eventually even ask her family for financial help. No one wanted to associate with her anymore once they learned the details of the court case. In the end, the person who had always demanded luxury and control found herself alone, forced to face the consequences of her own greed. As for me, I rebuilt my life, focusing on my work and on the things that truly mattered to me. The peace I finally felt was something I hadn't experienced in years. And with that, I closed that chapter, leaving behind the memory of someone who had spent so long trying to tear me down.